When many people think about the transatlantic slave trade, they imagine Europeans arriving in Africa, capturing random people, and forcing them onto ships. But history is rarely that simple. Because in West Africa, there once existed a powerful empire that became extraordinarily wealthy by selling other Africans into slavery. Its name was the Oyo Empire. And the story complicates almost everything most people think about or think they understand about slavery. The Oyo Empire emerged around the 14th century in what is now southwestern Nigeria. Over time, it became one of the most powerful states in West Africa. Oyo was not weak. It was not isolated. And it was certainly not primitive. It was organized, militarily advanced, economically strategic, and politically sophisticated. At its height, Oyo controlled major trade routes throughout the region. Its cavalry forces were feared across West Africa. And like many rising powers throughout human history, Oyo understood something dangerous. Human beings could become an economy. By the mid 1600s, the Oyo Empire had become deeply involved in the Atlantic slave trade. In fact, historians estimate that Oyo became one of the largest suppliers of captives along the Bight of Benin. Some estimates suggest Oyo supplied nearly 20% of the region's slave exports during certain periods. So think about this carefully. This was not random chaos. It was organized commerce. Captives taken through war, raids, and regional conflicts were transported from Africa's interior towards coastal ports like Badagry and Lagos and Porto Novo. There, European traders exchanged things like firearms, cloth, metal, and currency for human beings. And the wealth generated from this trade strengthened Oyo's military power even further, which then enabled more conquest, more raids, and more captives. A cycle, a system, an economy built on human suffering. But slavery inside Oyo was not limited to export. The empire also maintained complex internal systems of slavery. Many captives became laborers. They worked farms, mines, textile production, and construction. Others entered systems of debt bondage known as iwofa. In this system, a person, sometimes even a child, could be pledged as collateral for debt. Some slaves became palace officials, trusted servants, tax collectors, political enforcers, and even high ranking administrators. Why? Because rulers often trusted enslaved officials more than free nobles, because their loyalty depended entirely on the king. Some captives were sacrificed during religious ceremonies. Others became concubines for chiefs or royalty. This is the most, or the part of history that many people struggle with, because modern conversations often flatten slavery into one race oppressing another. But human history is rarely organized that neatly. So, why are stories like this rarely discussed publicly? Because simplified narratives are emotionally useful. They create moral clarity, emotional unity, political direction, and social identity. Complexity disrupts certainty, and uncertainty makes people uncomfortable. Once people emotionally attach themselves to a historical narrative, they often begin protecting it instead of examining it. It's not because they're evil, but because identity is powerful. Human beings naturally resist information that complicates the stories that they use to understand themselves. Ironically, the same slave trade that helped build Oyo's power eventually helped to destroy it. By the early 1800s, global pressure against the Atlantic slave trade began increasing. And when the trade was outlawed, Oyo lost one of its primary economic engines. Wealth declined, internal instability increased, civil wars erupted, and weakened by conflict, the empire became vulnerable to external attacks, including the Fulani Jihad from the north. By 1837, the Oyo Empire collapsed. But perhaps the most tragic irony came afterwards. Many Yoruba people who once belonged to the dominant power structure became victims themselves. Neighboring states, including Dahomey, captured and sold many Yoruba people into the Atlantic slave trade during the 19th century. The raiders became the raided. Maybe the deeper lesson here is not simply about slavery. Maybe it's about power. Human beings often imagine themselves morally different from those who came before them. But history repeatedly shows that when power, profit, fear, and opportunity all line up, many societies become capable of some horrifying things. Across races, across nations, across religions, across civilizations, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps the most dangerous historical narratives are not the ones that are false, but the ones that are only partially true. Because partial truths can shape identity while hiding complexity. The story of the Oyo Empire does not erase the European involvement in slavery. It does not erase racism. And it does not erase suffering. But it does force us to confront something uncomfortable. Human exploitation did not belong to one race. It belonged to human beings. And maybe honest understanding begins when we become willing to examine history beyond emotionally convenient narratives. So let me ask you, why do you think certain parts of history are emphasized while other parts are rarely discussed? Let me know what you think.